Adam Higginbotham's Midnight in Chornobyl, the untold story of the world's greatest nuclear disaster, is, as you'd expect, a history book about the 1986 nuclear disaster that took place on the Chornobyl power plant, located on the territory of Ukraine near the town of Pripyat. The book is a history book, but it's written by a journalist who allowed his inquisitive approach to tell the story. So there's not only a historical aspect to the story, but also a personal, political, and even scientific aspect as well. He goes into detail about the science behind the reactor and nuclear fission, and also tells you about the families affected by the disaster. Regarding the politics, Ukraine was, of course, as you most likely know, part of the Soviet Union at the time. The book therefore uses Russian spelling, unfortunately, for most of the names of cities. What you might not have considered, though, is that the fault of the accident is one that can be attributed to the Soviet system from the top all the way to the bottom. Higginbotham tells this story of the Soviet scientists who designed the reactor that eventually malfunctioned, as well as the story of the plant operators who proceeded with testing even after the initial testing showed unreliable results. He also tells the story of the Soviet system that failed to respond promptly and decisively and attempted to cover up the disaster. Without doubt, there's a lot of blame to go around when considering the Chernobyl 1986 disaster. The book, of course, mentions many names and even provides a chart at the beginning, or I guess a syllabus, a sort of list of names, as a disaster this large usually involves more than one person. But the one consistent trend that underlined the entire disaster was that no one wanted to admit it was possible. The scientists felt that their design was appropriate, but that it was the operators to blame. The analogy used in their defense was that if you design a car and the car breaks or hits a pedestrian, you don't immediately blame the manufacturer, but you blame the driver. This was the manufacturer's attitude towards the operators when he was accused of designing a faulty reactor. The plant operators, for their part, felt a great amount of pressure from the government to produce results and insisted on testing the nuclear reactor even when safety was less secure than it should have been. The government most infamously didn't want to accept responsibility, nor did they even admit the accident was possible. The faith in the Soviet system was not one of optimism, but one where it was actively discouraged to question the ability of the USSR. If someone suggested better safety measures, the suggestion would be not only ignored, but rebuked as it implied that the Soviet system was not perfect and could produce errors. It's impossible to argue with such an arrogant form of circular reasoning. When I consider this book, I tend to compare it to Serhii Plokhy's Chornobyl, the history of a nuclear catastrophe. This is probably because there are only two books I've read about the accident, but between the two of them, however, they do tell slightly different stories. Both Higginbotham's book and Plokhy's book paint a clear picture describing the bureaucratic hubris that led to the disaster. What Serhii Plokhy tells, that Higginbotham doesn't tell, though, is about the political aftermath that ended up leading to Ukraine's independence. What happened was, in response to the disaster, the USSR allowed Soviet civil political societies to promote ecology. This was in line with glasnost, the openness that was part of Gorbachev's reform. With this freedom for civil societies to form, people were able to then gather for various causes more freely, and this included Ukrainian independence. Similarly, with Chernobyl being such a catastrophic disaster, and one that the USSR attempted but failed to cover up, the Soviet system lost all political credibility in the eyes of the people. As much as Gorbachev tried to save the USSR, his own reforms were incompatible with the Soviet Union because the country was inherently totalitarian. This aftermath, where the disaster led to civil unrest, was not really part of Higginbotham's telling of the story. Higginbotham rather takes a more traditional approach and focuses on just the immediate response and the Soviet government's handling of the disaster. He mentions Poroshenko's commemoration of the disaster and how it was viewed in the aftermath of the 2014 Russian invasion of Crimea and the Donbass, as being part of Russia's legacy of oppression towards Ukraine. But for the most part, Higginbotham is primarily focused on the causes for the disaster and the solutions that the USSR pursued. Perhaps one of the most controversial claims is concerning Gorbachev. Now, I've read different places, different things about Gorbachev's handling of the accident. In Higginbotham's book, Gorbachev is presented as a genuine figure who wants to present transparency for the Chernobyl disaster. Now, I don't remember if this was in a chapter of Ann Applebottom's book, Red Famine, or in Serhii Plokhy's book, but elsewhere I read that Gorbachev was complicit in the cover-up, and that it was only after 30 days of failing to cover up the disaster that he wanted to inform the public. Most famously, a few weeks after the disaster, Gorbachev, as well as the local Ukrainian official Vladimir Shcherbetsky, authorized a May Day parade in Kiev. Online, I read that Shcherbetsky wanted to cancel the parade, but this book gave me the impression that he was a bit more complicit in the parade. It said, from what I recall, just go ahead with the parade. Those were his words. In any case, Gorbachev mandated the parade even after knowing that the radiation levels were a risk for the Kiev population. And whether he pursued transparency or not, it's clear that the Soviet system overall did not respond with the immediate transparency needed. Higginbotham's book provides a clear, honest, professional account of the Chernobyl disaster. To the best of my knowledge, he's not deliberately distorting anything, but just trying to tell the history in a clear way. I felt it was a good book in this regard, as the events are rather complex, and he's able to communicate them in a way that's easy to read and comprehend. If you're interested in the Chernobyl disaster, I would recommend this book along with Serhii Plokhy's book. But if you're asking me if this book changed my perspective or added unique insight on any of the events, I'm not sure it did. I don't always read things as carefully as I should, so the problem may be my own, but that's my initial take. It received the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Nonfiction in 2020, so I'm guessing there must be something good about it that I'm not considering. Maybe you read it and have a different opinion. Feel free to comment below. In any case, if you like this video, feel free to check out the channel and like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.